Hey there, Alex Kidman here with my review, finally, of the Nothing Phone 3. Been waiting a while to do this. This is a new kind of thing for Nothing because previously the brand's really concentrated on the value segment, on providing better value phones with some higher end spec pieces in them. This is a high spec phone at a premium price. Not that you'd know it to look at the front of the thing, of course. At the front, what we're talking about is a 6.67 inch, 120Hz capable AMOLED display with a centrally mounted hole punch for the front-facing camera. So far, so ordinary. It's 120Hz capable, although it's of the type where you get a 60Hz refresh rate or a 120Hz refresh rate, and that's your lot. You don't get the whole LTPO thing of going down to 1 Hz to save battery power when it's appropriate, although you do get a dynamic setting which will try to pick the best refresh rate depending on the content you're looking at. Premium phones need premium protection, and the Nothing Phone 3 features an IP68 rating for water and dust ingress. Always nice to see, although it's only got Corning Gorilla Glass 7i on the front, and that's more of your mid-range protective glass, and this is definitely a premium price phone. It's on the lower tier of some premium price phones, but it's still definitely playing in that kind of market. Might have been nice to see something just that little bit more durable. On the sides, it's all fairly plain and simple as well. On the right-hand side, you've got a combined power and assistant button as well as the essential key. We saw that on the Nothing Phone 3A and a few other phones as well. And then if we flip around to the other side, you of course then have just standard volume controls. At the base, you get USB-C for data and a SIM card slot, dual SIM card plus eSIM. Always nice to see. Although I will say the sides of this thing remind me an awful lot of the iPhone 16. I'm going to drop the iPhone 16 in on top of it. And yeah, okay, not quite same, but just on those kind of rounded corners and edges, there's some definite similarity there. And similarity is not something you can say when I flip the Nothing Phone 3 around, because this is the big design point for this particular phone. It's an odd-looking phone. Some choices were made, shall we say. Now, your color choices here are not extensive. This is the white model, of course, but there is also a black variant. You've got these oddly offset camera lenses, this little red dot here for reasons. The glyph screen, the glyph matrix it is now here, with a little touch control button down the bottom, just there, which at the moment, of course, is just telling me how much battery it's got, but I can cycle through various other functions. And then just lots of shapes, lots of things going on. Now, I kind of like it. I like the fact that Nothing's gone for something that looks a little bit different, a little bit out there, not run-of-the-mill. But I totally get this is divisive. Some people think it's just flat, ugly. And yeah, I mean, it is a taste thing. I do appreciate the fact that Nothing does give you a case in the box, because obviously this design is, it's not exactly a regular camera layout. And it is just a clear case. I'm just going to pop it on here because, as regular viewers will know, I'm a big fan of putting cases on every single phone in order to protect them. But what about the cameras? I'm so glad you asked. At its premium grade price, the Nothing Phone 3 really has to step it up in the camera space. And it does this with a trio of 50 megapixel sensors at the rear, 50 megapixel wide, 50 megapixel ultra wide, 114 degrees, and 50 megapixel telephoto 3x optical zoom. The hole punch at the front houses a, you guessed it, 50 megapixel selfie camera as well. Now that's a lot of megapixels, but taking good photos is more than just a sum of adding up how many pixels you've crammed into how many sensors. And honestly, for the most part, the Nothing Phone 3 takes photos that look nice. The default here is for 12.5 megapixel shots using pixel binning to sharpen up your photos. You can opt, if you can take the storage hit, to take full-fat 50 megapixel shots if you prefer. For everyday regular photos, as you expect, things are just fine. It's in those additional areas of things like zoom and low light that a premium phone really needs to step up. On the zoom front, the native 3x zoom can be pushed out with a digital hybrid approach all the way up to 60 times with the promise of AI smoothing. Although, like most of these things that go to extreme zooms, it does not work all that well. Look, I'll give you some examples here. 3x zoom on this pigeon, yeah, that's fine. 6x is fine, and you can push that up to maybe around 20, but if we go to 60 on this shot, yeah, it's not a good look. Sorry, Mr. Pigeon, I didn't do a very good job of photographing you. You can also use the ultra-wide lens for macro shots. That can work nicely enough, although you've got to have a bit of patience, as you pretty much always do with macro. And the Nothing Phone 3 also lets you set visual profiles. I mean, in a way, these are just fancy filters, but some of them can look really nice. I do rather like their black and white filter, Not a big fan of the fact that the default for its defined filters is to always have all the watermarks on. I know that's a style that some photographers really, really adore, showing off their work when it was done and what the settings were. I'd rather have the option to switch those watermarks off, which you can really only do if you create a full copy of the profile style and then use that new profile to take the same shot. I don't get why they don't let us edit the profiles that are there, but that was Nothing's call, I guess. Overall, though, while this shoot's okay, it's not super quick, and for the kind of money we're talking about, you are getting up into that really premium flagship space. I feel like Nothing's done a decent job here, but the likes of Samsung and Apple, and to an extent Google, still have it ever so slightly beaten at this kind of price. On the performance front, the Nothing Phone 3 represents Nothing's big foray into the premium space, but here, once again, Nothing has thought a little differently. Right now, as I'm recording this video, if you were making a premium Android smartphone, the odds are very, very high that you would stuff a Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Elite processor into its frame. And that's not what Nothing's done. Instead, it runs on a Snapdragon 8S Gen 4, paired up with either 12 gig or 16 gig of RAM, depending on whether or not you buy the 256 gig or 512 gig storage version. Predictably, the higher, more expensive storage version gets more RAM. The version that Nothing has sent me for review, and I should point out this phone was sent to me, has no impact on the opinions of this review, but I can't review a phone without actually having a phone, you know? But that being said, the model that was sent to me is the 256 gig, 12 gig RAM variant. Now, the 8S Gen 4 is undeniably a step below the Snapdragon 8 Elite, and while the pricing here is just a shade under what you see a lot of premium flagships, especially the higher end premium flagships for, it's still within the same ballpark, and that doesn't sit great with me. And you can kind of see that in how this thing actually benchmarks. So let's have a look at how this compares against phones that cost about the same at the time of recording this video. These are Australian prices. Obviously, prices can vary over time. But at the time of recording this video, here's how it compared using Geekbench 6's CPU test. Now, it's not a surprise that the Nothing Phone 3 beats out the Pixel 10 here, given the AI focus of the Tensor G5 processor in that particular phone. I've included the cheaper Nothing Phone 3A and 3A Pros there because you might be thinking across the range. Obviously, those are considerably cheaper phones, but it is interesting to see where they comparatively sit. Still, the iPhone 16's just had a price drop because as I'm recording this, the 17 is due out in a couple of days, and the S25 Edge both beat it out pretty handily, and they can be had for around the same prices. The S25 Edge is a fair old price cut, I'll admit, from when it came out, but I have seen the S25 and S25 Plus, which should perform around the same at similar prices to what Nothing wants for the Nothing Phone 3. And this is a pattern that repeats itself if we look at GPU power by way of 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. And look, the practical reality here is the Nothing Phone 3 is not best in class, and with that processor it probably was never going to be, but for most users it's got enough power. However, it is sitting in the premium space, and in the premium space it doesn't make a lot of sense to pay the same or similar for a system that runs slower than others. It just doesn't. In terms of updates, Nothing promises 5 Android OS updates and 7 years of security updates, slightly behind the pace of 7 of each offered by rivals Samsung and Google, though a little better than pretty much anyone else in this respect. Like the Nothing Phone 3A, you also get the Essential key for launching Nothing's Essential Space app, which is one part screenshot organizer, one part voice and text notes app. And look, it's fine. I do have some concerns about maybe having all your data in this one app if you wanted to then switch away from Nothing phones, because it's such a Nothing specific feature, but it works well enough. There's a few other weird little AI features. There's a newsreader feature, which kind of creates a little AI read podcast for you based on interests. It's not very refined, though, or at least the version that I've seen is not refined. Chatting to some other journalists, apparently it used to be a little bit snarkier and it used to have a few more configuration options, but what I was presented with was a bit more basic and not that compelling. Also, kind of hidden away in the settings. And then, of course, there's the Glyph Matrix. So this is the rear display micro LED circle that sits at the top right of the back of the phone. And you can cycle through a bunch of what Nothing calls toys. So you can get a clock, or you can play Spin the Bottle. I don't know why you'd want to play Spin the Bottle, but yeah, it's something that you can do. Whoever's facing that way, I guess it's King Ghidorah, you're in trouble. But you can play Spin the Bottle if you must. I mean, that's just a kind of silly thing. You can get battery. It'll also show you things like the volume going up if you enable that. Now, is this a must-have feature? No. Honestly, though, I think I prefer it to the older Glyph lights that Nothing used to use, just because it is actually that bit more informative and it's not quite as rough on your eyes if you are a bit light sensitive. You could just about get away with using this in a way that the Glyph system, you absolutely couldn't. Nothing does still warn you, though, that people with light sensitivities may struggle with this one a bit. I can see where they're coming from in that respect. On the battery front, the Nothing Phone 3 is built around a 5,150 milliamp hour battery, just a shade larger than the typical 5,000 milliamp hour power pack found in most Android phones. But as I've seen so many times, however, having a larger battery is not automatically a promise of superior battery power. And I've got a whole video about the challenges in battery testing. Feel free to go and watch that at your leisure. What I tend to do is I run a standardized YouTube battery test for 3 hours across most phones to get a comparative picture of where their battery life sits. And the first thing I look for here is at least 90% battery after the first hour. Something that falls below that is probably going to struggle to get through a day of most people's usage. So how does the Nothing Phone 3 compare? So on the optimistic side, any phone that cracks above 90%, as I said, can typically manage day's moderate usage without too many issues. And anecdotally, yeah, I can get through a day's usage the way I've been testing the Nothing Phone 3 over the past couple of weeks. But again, usage patterns can differ a whole bunch. That's not an absolute promise that everyone will. And the problem is on the pessimistic side, the Nothing Phone 3 still sits as a more premium priced phone, and I expect more if I'm paying more, especially when the competition delivers a bit more, and even the cheaper Nothing phones deliver more and better battery life than this did. On the charging side, the Nothing Phone 3 supports a whole host of connection types. For power coming in, it'll hand up to 65-watt wired charging. You will need to provide your own charger. There's not one in the box, or at least there's not one in the Australian box. Or 15-watt Qi charging. For power coming from it, it will send power out wirelessly at 5 watts or via a wired cable at 7.5 watts, although, given its somewhat mediocre battery, I don't know that you want to do that too much. So, should you buy the Nothing Phone 3? Look, I do love that Nothing thinks differently. It's delivered some of the most unique looking phones on the market, and I've certainly had my fill of reviewing dull black slabs of phone. Nobody can accuse the Nothing Phone 3 of being a dull black slab. And some of what Nothing's done here also has function hidden behind that unusual form. While initially, I'll be honest, I wrote off the Glyph interface as a gimmick, much as I'd found it on prior Nothing phones, the smaller and more interactive display gives it some genuine quick utility. The Essential Key, if you like that kind of thing, has some serious productivity scope, even if it does sometimes confuse me when I'm reaching for the power button. However, Nothing's best products to date have been those that match quirky style up with affordability, and here, Nothing's playing in an entirely new shark pool for the Nothing Phone 3. Even at the lower spec price of $1,509 Australian, it's up there with the bigger established players, most of whom offer just that little bit more at this price point. Whether it's the AI-first focus of phones like the Pixel 10, the thin style of the Galaxy S25 Edge, or Apple's strong OS control as found in the iPhone 16. It makes this a tough phone to get really excited about at its basic price. Now, when and if that price drops, yes, this becomes a much better and more compelling buy. Right now, it's a quirky phone. It's an interesting phone. There is some stuff about it that I like. It's certainly not a bad phone in any real way, but it just doesn't quite do enough to justify that high asking price. Thanks for watching.